next session, which is about to begin. Thank you. Illusions and Realities is about to begin. Najmuddin Sheikh in conversation with Ahmad Rashid. Najmuddin Sheikh Saab is a distinguished diplomat with degrees of BCom from the Sindh Universities and MA from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, USA. He joined the Foreign Service in 1961. He has been ambassador to several countries, including Canada, Germany, USA, and Iran. Mr. Ahmad Rashid is one of the best known writers and commentators on Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and increasingly the Middle East. He has covered this complex area in detail for a variety of publications since 1979. May I ask Mr. Najmuddin Sheikh to begin the session?
Hello, can you hear me? Hello there. Yeah, that's better. Well, thank you all very much for coming. There's a great fun program going on around you, and for you to come and sit through a session on Afghanistan shows your concern and your dedication, and we are both very grateful that you've made it. And it's nice to see so many young people here also taking an interest. Afghanistan has literally been the albatross hanging around Pakistan's neck for nearly 40 years since the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979. I think the situation is probably the worst it's ever been right now. We have 4 ongoing crises in Afghanistan. An economic crisis with tens of thousands of Afghans leaving for Europe. You have a military crisis with the Taliban taking more and more territory, the Afghan army more and more demoralized. And you have a political crisis in Kabul, as President Ashraf Ghani is facing huge opposition from Pashtuns, non-Pashtuns, the warlords, political groups, etc., for having failed to come to grips with any of these issues. And the fourth is the growing international attention and in a malignant way being given to Afghanistan. I'll come to Pakistan in a minute, but right now you have Taliban who are being hosted by Iran, and Iran is backing both the government and a section of the Taliban. The Russians are deeply involved with some of the Taliban groups in northern Afghanistan that border Central Asia, and and also they are hosting the next round of talks between the regional countries, and not admitting the United States to those talks. And lastly, of course, there's Pakistan. Pakistan, as you well know, backed the Taliban in the 90s in the civil war against what was then called the Northern Alliance, made up of non-Pashtun ethnic groups. And it was a regional civil war of huge consequences. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Pakistan, backing the Taliban, and Iran, Russia, India, Tajikistan backing the Northern Alliance. We're seeing a repeat of that right now. And I think, Pakistan had several options to get rid of the Taliban problem, broker a peace deal with Kabul. The first, of course, was after 9/11, and in the years after 9/11. Instead, as President Musharraf himself has written, the military and the ISI rebuilt the Taliban when it was a defeated organization, rebuilt it because they feared for whatever reason, that the Americans were leaving for Iraq and that the Taliban would be Pakistan's best political option. Well, if you take from the time of 2003 today, the Taliban have grown into a huge military machine, a monster, which has sheltered many Pakistani militant groups, extremist groups, as they are doing in Afghanistan right now. The Pakistani Taliban, in fact, is being sheltered by Al-Qaeda and the Afghan Taliban. Even though we call the Afghan Taliban our friends, and we have given the leadership of the Afghan Taliban full sanctuary in Quetta and Peshawar since 2001. And most seriously, it is from here that most of their logistics and supplies, including ammunition and weapons and food and clothing and all the rest of it, goes into Afghanistan from Pakistan, although a lot of it now is from Iran and Russia. And I think we had lost another huge opportunity a year ago when President Ashraf Ghani came and met the army chief, General Rahil, and said, you know, whatever you want, but help me broker a peace deal with the Taliban. And we messed up that opportunity by not taking advantage of it. And now the Afghans have resorted back to their normal position, which is full of hatred and venom for Pakistan, cozying up to India and possibly buying arms for India. Everything that Ashraf Ghani had actually put on hold for nearly the first 6 months of his time, hoping that there would be a positive reaction from Pakistan. So I'm just simplifying, and of course, it's much more complex than even what I've spoken about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you. I'd like to supplement what Ahmed has said. Sorry? Can you hear me at all? Or I think it has to be about this distance from before it can be heard. I just wanted to supplement what Ahmed said with regard to the internal situation in Afghanistan. Statistically now, according to the Inspector General appointed by the US to oversee what is happening in Afghanistan, the Taliban now control about 38.2% of the territory, which is a formidable amount of territory, because the hold of the government is only on 57.2% of the Afghan territory. The Afghan National Security Forces have come up to 350,000, but their attrition level is high, their discipline is low, and their fighting capabilities, except for a few select units, is regarded as extremely doubtful. The amount of money that has been wasted in Afghanistan has been detailed by SOPCO. One of the figures that he used was that last year, the American organization charged with this task spent more than $500 million on trying to develop the mineral resources of Afghanistan with zero results. $132 million, they said, were mismanaged and were embezzled. They say, according to him, the only bright spot was the fact that President Ashraf Ghani's reforms have worked to the point where 200 million were saved by using the right procurement techniques. But this is a very far cry from what is needed in Afghanistan. Narcotics production has gone up by 45% from 2015 to 2016. And I think one of the things that we don't pay enough attention to is how much of that drugs or the narcotics in terms of opium or refined heroin pass through Pakistan. We seem to entertain the illusion that they pass through Pakistan without leaving Pakistan unharmed, and this is not true. Certainly, a minimum of 10 and perhaps more than 20% of the heroin that traffics through Pakistan stays in Pakistan, adding to the number of heroin addicts that we have in this country, and in a sense, eroding the flower of your youth. This is true in Afghanistan, this is true in Pakistan, and now both have a large, we don't acknowledge the true figure, but I think we have more than 3 million heroin addicts. Afghanistan has about 1.5 at this point. The economic situation is bad. The 40% unemployment is talked about. Rashid mentioned the fact that people are seeking to migrate. Well, there are 50,000 people plus who are waiting in various corners of Europe, seeking refuge there and not finding it. Agreements are being reached by Germany to bring them back, and Germany makes its aid to Afghanistan conditional on the fact that these people will be sent back. So the economic situation is dire, and yet I think Rashid mentioned the fact that there are difficulties for Ashraf Ghani. I think that those difficulties have acquired a particular dimension now that a warlord in Balkh, Ata Nur Muhammad, is seeking to come to an understanding with Ashraf Ghani and thereby undercutting or cutting out Abdullah, and therefore destroying the foundation of the national unity government. So you have a very complex situation. You have a situation in which perhaps the Taliban get maybe 40-45% of the revenues from of the illicit revenues from the opium trade, but 50-55% goes to Afghan officials. And this is my estimate. I don't think that that estimate is called into question very often. Ata Nur Muhammad controls one of the most lucrative drug trafficking routes to Central Asia and onwards to Russia. And he is certainly not very anxious that that route should be stopped or that his lucrative revenue sources should be stopped. So you have a situation which is extremely complex and in which there is talk even of Afghanistan falling apart. I don't subscribe to that because I think through these years, since 1979, the one thing that has emerged clearly is that the Afghans valued their unity and were prepared to work towards conquering whatever diversities there were and staying together. However, one must acknowledge that at this time there seem to be elements which may perhaps break for a north-south divide. And if that happens, then the dangers to Pakistan would multiply manifold. Let me turn from the situation in Afghanistan to what it means for us. It is axiomatic, and I think Ahmed pointed to the fact that the Afghan Taliban are the people to whom the Pakistani Taliban, the TPP, look for support. They are being given sanctuary in Afghanistan in areas that are under their control, under the control of the Afghan Taliban. And the Taliban in Pakistan have never made any secret of the fact that they have given their bath or their oath of loyalty to Mullah Umar and subsequently, I assume now, to Habatullah Akhund, the new leader. The point that needs to be seen is that if Afghanistan continues in this particular state, then our battles, Zarb-e-Azb and others, are not likely to prove very fruitful. Because unless there is stability in Afghanistan, we will not have stability in our border areas. We have taken the first steps, I think very good steps, towards border management and for introducing the biometric system and ensuring that all movement is as between two independent sovereign states. This is not a practice that we followed in the past, but even instilling the system and making it work is going to take another year, maybe more, to be fully functional. And in that time, we will face more dangers unless we do things that we require to do for ourselves. We don't need to do this for anybody else, but we need to do it for our own stability because our stability is very dependent on bringing stability, a modicum of stability to Afghanistan. Once we do that, then of course the opportunities for Pakistan in terms of economic development increase manifold. Not merely because of trade, but because these will open the routes to energy, meeting our energy requirements from Central Asia, meeting our energy requirements and not only energy requirements, but also other requirements of trade with Central Asia and further beyond. I'm not suggesting that this is an answer, because obviously these markets are not the biggest markets in the world, but even so, we would then be expanding the connectivity of Pakistan to the rest of the world. We have had for a long time fears that Afghanistan will be used by India as India's influence in Afghanistan increases, will be used against Pakistan. I have a feeling that we need to examine this question much more closely than has happened in the past. It should be looked at analytically, without taking it as a knee-jerk reaction, that if India has influence, then that influence will be sufficient to use Afghan territory against Pakistan. We need to look at that more carefully, take a more holistic view of the situation in Afghanistan, and accept, I think I make this point categorically, that for your own stability, for the stability of Pakistan, for Pakistan's economic progress, and for Pakistan to be able to establish connections westwards, both Iran and Afghanistan, Central Asia, we need to try and work for stability in Afghanistan. How can we do this? The President Ashraf Ghani did come here. I think Ahmed pointed to the fact that this was a missed opportunity. I'm not sure that all the misfortune was on our side. There are strong elements in Afghanistan which were seeking to subvert a better relationship. I go back to the fact that instability plays a role in the economic benefits of some people in Afghanistan, and for them the continuation of instability is preferable to moving towards the sort of solution that Pakistan would have to offer. My own view is that the news about the death of Mullah Omar was revealed in Kabul deliberately to forestall the second session that was scheduled of negotiations that were to take place between the Taliban, or a Taliban team theoretically nominated by Mullah Omar with the Afghan delegation, and that particular process broke down. But the quadrilateral coordination group and the efforts that are being made with Russia and China in Moscow, and on which I think there's a possibility of another meeting, these must focus on how we can bring the Taliban to the table with a negotiating stance that would enable a mediated solution, that would a reconciliation solution. Now, the Taliban, as far as I've been able to gather, and there have been some reports to this effect, are no longer monolithic. Habatullah Akhund does not control the power brokers, the Taliban power brokers which exist in Helmand and perhaps in other provinces. They're a group led by people who are loyal to Akhtar Mansoor, seem to have the upper hand, and seem to be able to deprive Habatullah Akhund of control of the finances, and therefore there's a much more split movement. There are suggestions that because the movement is split, there are among them groups which would want to bring to an end a war which they cannot win, but which means a continuation of strife that brings benefits to nobody except those benefiting from the narcotics trade. So one has to look more carefully, and we have in Pakistan had very long experience of dealing with the Afghans. We must bring together all our expertise and skills, and this expertise must be used in the full knowledge or in the full acceptance of the fact that Pakistan's own stability, Pakistan's own economic progress, Pakistan's role as a bridge between South Asia and West Asia, between South Asia and Central Asia, will only be possible when there is stability in Afghanistan. If we accept this as the fundamental starting point, then we have the expertise, we have the knowledge, I hope, to be able to identify those Taliban groups who will engage in reconciliation talks and be able to isolate those who will not. And when I talk about isolate, I mean that we must then be able to take whatever actions are necessary to prevent them from blocking the an arrangement being arrived at between the two countries.
Let me just say
Please.
a few things, please. I think the problem with this is that you need a radical sea change in the thinking of the military, who now basically control foreign policy regarding Afghanistan and India. And we've been, successively we've heard from the military their conviction that we should be looking at our internal problems and internally based terrorism and other issues rather than blaming outsiders. But the moment there's a bomb attack in Quetta or Peshawar or somewhere else, we immediately go back to form and start blaming India. India is funding the Taliban, India is arming the Pakistani Taliban, India is exploding bombs, or the Afghans themselves. We frequently accuse the Afghans also of doing exactly the same thing. So I think what is required is not just a sort of cosmetic change. What is required is a very fundamental change. I think the other really depressing factor is that the civilian government, parliament, civilian institutions are completely out of the picture of trying to bring about a policy change. When you believe you have the truth, and when you don't engage with the rest of society, quite frankly, you're going to come up with wrong policies. Now, from the Afghan side, there was a hiatus. When Ashraf Ghani came in, for about 6 months, or as a lot of the Afghans, as Najmuddin says, a lot of the Afghans didn't like the idea of talking to Pakistan and getting Pakistan's help in negotiating with the Taliban. But there was a calming down of the tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There was a normalization of relations. There were intelligence to intelligence, meetings going on, etc. But we never delivered. And that simply was the fact that all they were saying was, allow us to speak to the Taliban. Even some of the Taliban leaders who've been jailed. Now the fact of the matter is that the Taliban leadership is called the Quetta Shura. That itself is a giveaway. We don't call it the Kandahar Shura or the Kabul Shura. We call it the Quetta Shura. The world calls it the Quetta Shura. Which means what? That it's sitting in Quetta. So, I think, a long time ago, Pakistan should have given an ultimatum to these guys that they have to come into a dialogue with Kabul. And Kabul has been obviously willing, mostly, even Karzai was, for some kind of power sharing deal with the Taliban. And the danger now is that it's getting out of everyone's hands. Because now, as I said, you've got so many outside powers doing exactly what Pakistan had been doing for the last so many years, since 9/11. That is, supporting an a Taliban group, funding them, but also funding the government, and playing this kind of double game, with the Afghans. Russia's doing it, Iran is doing it, other states are doing it. And secondly, the Taliban itself has fragmented. In the last 2 years, because of all these, the death of Mullah Omar, Mullah Mansoor was killed in a drone attack, and now we're into the third leader, who was, according to most Afghans, seems to have been nominated more by Pakistan than by the Taliban. He's a weak figure. He spent all his life in Quetta heading a madrasa. He was never a political leader with the Taliban. There are the fragmentation within the Taliban is getting worse and worse. And the military situation, the military command, because you've got a weak political leadership in the Taliban, the military command is more and more being given over to the Haqqanis, which is a very astute, well-trained, well-organized terrorist group which is very active in Afghanistan and also basically has sanctuary in Pakistan.
Well, in fairness, I think we've had an effort by many governments to try and isolate the Taliban or talk to the Taliban, setting Pakistan apart. A Qatar office was set up for this purpose. It's still operational. It isn't quite what it should have been, what was expected to be, because the Taliban at that time insisted on being recognized as the Emirate of Afghanistan, which Karzai was not prepared to do. But what I'm trying to say is that there have been efforts, and there have been successful efforts by the Afghan government to talk to the Taliban directly. Now what is needed is that when you talk to the Taliban directly, you must be able to identify which are the groups that are prepared to do so. When I talked about what Pakistan can do and what expertise Pakistan has, I'm including all the power centers in Pakistan. It's not merely the civilian government, as Ahmed Rashid said. There has been very little input from the civilian component of the power centers in Pakistan in the formulation or implementation of Afghan policy. That needs to change. But the expertise that is available, so long as everybody is clear that what you want is stability in Afghanistan, because without stability in Afghanistan, you cannot have stability here. You take that as a starting point. You take as a starting point the fact that you need to critically analyze your fears about the use of Afghan territory by hostile forces against you. You need to critically analyze what exactly is the assistance that the Iranians, the Russians, and the others can provide, and to what end. Because for most of these powers, their interference at this time is against the possible upsurge of the Islamic State, or ISIS, or Daesh, whichever name you choose to give it, in Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan, let us acknowledge that in the eyes of the world, and I'm not saying the Western world alone, I'm talking about the eyes of the world, meaning China, Russia included. They believe that South Asia, or this part of South Asia, is the epicenter of terrorism. Now that issue has to be addressed, and that addressing that issue will address the big problem that we have when we are talking about eliminating our internal threat from extremism and terrorism. We must look upon that as part of the battle that has to be fought in Afghanistan also, and which can, in my view, be handled correctly and astutely if we put all our expertise together and aim it at this particular objective of securing stability in Afghanistan as one element in securing stability in Pakistan.
I think we really have to understand the nitty-gritty of why peace in Afghanistan is so important for the future of Pakistan. It's not a question that we can continue, tolerating the situation. The first thing is CPAC. CPAC will demand, the needs of CPAC demand that there be peace in Afghanistan. We cannot have these pipelines and roads and railways and connections being attacked by Pakistani Taliban, by groups sheltering in Afghanistan, or even by the Afghan Taliban and Al-Qaeda or Daesh, as Naguddin has said. So the security of CPAC, quite frankly, if you ask me, the government decided to raise a new division of 10,000 troops to protect the Chinese in Lahore and in Punjab and in Balochistan, etc. To me, the best solution would be if we went all out for a political settlement. And the Chinese would certainly support it. Remember last year, they supported this quadrilateral peace process. The Chinese are desperate to support a peace process and end the war in Afghanistan, because they also have plans for investment in Afghanistan. So the first thing is that we need peace on our border. And we need to go all out for a political solution in Afghanistan, rather than thinking that we can raise more troops and defend the Chinese here by raising another division of troops. I think the second most important is Gwadar. Gwadar is going to turn into the biggest white elephant you have ever seen unless you are able to access traffic from Central Asia. Not just China. China you can access because it's within your territory. But from Central Asia, traffic that will come from Turkmenistan, from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, through Afghanistan, down into Balochistan and to Gwadar. That is what is going to refloat the idea of the second port and us being the critical link to Central Asia. And the third, of course, is oil and gas. The fact that we've got this gas pipeline from Turkmenistan that has been pending since 1994, and it still hasn't been built. So, it's not just a question of benefits. Our future depends that CPAC really works. And it does not end up as a white elephant, that Gwadar doesn't end up as a white elephant. And so we need these solutions, but first we need peace in Afghanistan. Just as I may add we need a settlement in Balochistan with some of these factions that are fighting in Balochistan.
Let me just add with regard to the economic picture, and I think all of us read reports about the fact that the U.S. Geological Survey says that there are $1 trillion worth of mineral deposits in Afghanistan. And the Afghans themselves say there's $3 trillion. Last year, as I pointed out, the Americans wasted, according to their own Inspector General, about $500 million on trying to develop the exploitation. They have not been able to do it. They have a mining law which is not fully operational. And as a result, much of the mining done in Afghanistan now is illegal and brings very little benefit to the state. But if you develop this properly, just think in terms of the fact that your Reykjavik deposit, a copper deposit, was termed uneconomic for the setting up of a smelting plant because they said you would not produce enough ore to justify a smelting plant. But there is ANAC in Afghanistan, possibly part of the same vein. If you bring the product from both ANAC and Reykjavik together, you can set up a smelting plant and work it that way. If you look at Hajigak, their steel, their iron ore deposits, which are said to be extremely rich, and for which the Indians put together a consortium which is going to invest $12 billion. If that comes to fruition, and now of course it's all been postponed because of the security situation, that ore will have to travel to destinations, perhaps the Karachi steel mill, perhaps other steel mills that can be set up, and so on with a whole range of rare earth minerals and others that can be exploited jointly by Pakistan and Afghanistan, and for which Pakistan will continue to be the logical route for export, logical route for finishing or refining. So we have to look at this and see what the benefits are and look at the economic side of this without allowing ourselves to be so obsessed with, in my view, a mistaken perception of the security considerations, so that we can then get on with what we need to do. Look at the geo-economic advantages of being a bridge, of being bringing about a stable Afghanistan with its advantage of bringing about stability in Pakistan, political stability in Pakistan, and with the economic advantages that it brings to us. I think maybe we can now let them ask the questions.
I just want to make a few. I just want to make a couple of quick points about the Afghans. The Afghans today view Pakistan with enormous venom and hatred, unfortunately. And this is, this is tragic and very sad, but I do believe that this kind of feeling can be turned around very quickly if we support a peace process and a power sharing between the Taliban and Kabul. The second thing is the Afghans are convinced that we want to take their sovereignty from them. We want to control their destiny and their state. And we have not been convincing enough for the Afghans and to tell them we have no desire to control your sovereignty. Your sovereignty is your own. And the third aspect of this is we should remember that Afghanistan, through 40 years of war, has never had a secession, even though it's a multi-ethnic society, multi-tribal society, it has never had a secessionist movement. The Russians have tried, the Iranians have tried, and frankly, at the end of the Russian occupation, even the Pakistanis tried to perhaps break away a bit of Afghanistan and make it your own bit of Afghanistan. But the Afghans really have refused to do it. And I think that is an enormous strength of the Afghans and of the Afghan sense of nationhood. And it's much stronger than many other states. And I think part of the reason is because Afghanistan was never colonized by the British. It was conquered, but it was never colonized. So I'm really, if attitudes can change here, they can certainly change back in Kabul. Yeah, let's take.
Let me just add on a slightly lighter note, the question of the venom with which we are regarded in Afghanistan. This is true. Every conference that I've gone to in Kabul, from 9 in the morning to 5 in the evening, I've heard critical remarks about Pakistan until we got together in the evening in an informal setting, at which time I would be told that my car is in the garage, the petrol has been filled. If there's a problem, I will head straight for Peshawar. Uh, the, the comment often made was that as prices fall in Kabul, prices will rise in Hayatabad and Peshawar. So there is that affinity, there is that kinship that exists, and which should enable us to overcome the current atmosphere that prevails of trying to infringe on Afghan sovereignty. We have to be clear that these are two independent sovereign countries with a border that must be regarded as exactly as sacrosanct as borders between any other two countries. And thereafter, I think we will be able to look for the stability that can come in both countries only if you set Afghanistan on the path of reconciliation and stability itself. Thank you. Now, questions.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Very honored to listen to you. My name is Walid Bizanjo. I'm from Balochistan, born and bred not far from the Afghan border.
Can we have those lights out, because we can't see.
Can't see my pretty face?
Thank you.
Okay. The Afghan war resulted in influx of millions of refugees, especially in Balochistan. My question is regarding the census, the population census. One of the major concerns of the indigenous people of Balochistan, which include the Baloch and Pashtuns, is that this census will not just turn us into minority, but also legitimize the stay of the Quetta Shura, as you gents pointed out, the human traffickers, drug trafficking, the Taliban, and also men involved in sectarian killing. Now, the Supreme Court has ordered that the census should take place within this year. We have hundreds and thousands of IDPs from Balochistan who migrated in Punjab. We have a very, very scattered population, very difficult to conduct census, and also the law and order situation. What are your views on the census, number one, and what can be done about it?
Do you want to address that?
Ahmad Rashid Saab.
Well, let me, I think that the question of the changes in the demographics in Balochistan have been clearly identified and are clearly a matter of concern. I think the government made a decision, I think it was announced yesterday or day before, that the registered refugees would be allowed to stay till the end of the year rather than being sent or being slowly asked to voluntarily return by March of 2017. So we are going to have this problem for some time. Now, can this problem be resolved by making the census clearly identifying those who are not Pakistani nationals, those who are Afghan nationals? I don't think it's an impossible task. First, it will exclude those who are already in refugee camps. Two, it will exclude those who are identifiable as Afghans. And this is not an impossible task by my reckoning, because sorry? No. What I'm saying is that if the census is held as scheduled or as is being planned, I think that there should not be a difficulty if we choose to do it correctly in identifying those who continue to be in Balochistan but who are not counted as residents, as permanent residents of Balochistan or as nationals of Pakistan. We know, my own estimate has always been that we had 1.7, this was the UNHCR figure, 1.7 million refugees, registered refugees. We had 1.7 million unregistered. And unfortunately, I think we had 1.7 who had acquired your documentation. Now, those who have acquired your documentation, some corrections have been made through NADRA. Some more corrections will need to be made. But this is a question of administering things correctly. It's not a question, it is not an impossible task, by my reckoning. If NADRA can start looking at papers more closely, at identifying those who have fraudulently acquired papers, then we should be able to identify those who need to be counted in the census, but not counted as Pakistani nationals, and certainly not counted as people who are permanent residents of Balochistan. It can be done. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it can be done. If NADRA can attempt what it is attempting right now, to identify those who have fraudulently acquired your nationality papers or your national identity cards, etc., then we can proceed further in this direction.
I have a question. Colonel Tahir Nagi, I am a retired army officer. I view the problem of Afghanistan. I have been brought up, the first posting I had was on Torkham. When the Mujahideens were withdrawing, the Russians were withdrawing. Carrying that scenario about 35, 40 years now hence, there is a very, very significant dynamics which is coming in our analysis. I feel that while taking out the analysis, we are still inclined toward the borderization of the problem, the Pakistan problem, the Afghan problem, or at best, the Indian problem, right? The dynamics have gone far beyond, I feel. The CPEC may be in infancy at the moment, and may people fearing as a white elephant, as you very rightly called at the moment. But the feelers are going as far as UK. The feelers going as far as Russia. You know, the problem is being internationalized. I think once they are showing interest, they must be realizing the nature of the problem already present in this part of the world, the Southeast Asia. I'm sure the analysis must be included. The question is, are our analysis going on? Whether it's army, whether it's the brain of any of these three countries, are we keeping this in the future?
Let me say that what do you think the interests of the UK or of the other countries which you say have internationalized the problem? What are their interests? I mean, why are they there? But tell me, which country in the world is going to be opposed to stability in Afghanistan, and why? Is the key to stability in Afghanistan in the region, or is it outside?
It's in the region. But the dynamic is going to solve the problem. Solving the problem you use very nicely. That in the near future, I'm looking still further. The interest is will increase the dynamics, and these forces will certainly play. And what shape it must be the Taliban at the moment in Afghanistan, or the Taliban in Pakistan. The Taliban Pakistan may be in shape now. We may be irrelevant very soon. If we put our foot more behind CPAC and try to bring it.
Can we move on to the next question?
I think.
Okay, next question, please.
Right. Could we have another question, please?
Yes, I've got two very small questions.
Yeah.
I just would like opinion about the future role of Russia, America, China, and India in this area, and their interest, and in their interest.
That's a look. I mean, as far as American policy is concerned, it's on hold with Mr. Trump messing up so many things already. We don't know what he's going to do in Afghanistan. And there are several key issues coming up. There's an indication they want to send more troops, but how many more troops? To do what? Is the American public and the Trump political base going to accept that? Because, you know, this is exactly what President Obama did in 2008 when he came into power. And the second issue is money. The Americans are giving around $10 billion a year for the army and the budget in Afghanistan. I don't see Trump continuing to give this kind of money. Then who's going to pay for the Afghans? Because the Afghans don't generate income themselves. So there are huge questions around American policy. Secondly, if Russia is to play a role in Afghanistan the way it is playing a role in Syria today, in other words, dominate the military sphere and then dominate the peace talks and the peace process, what is America's reaction going to be? What is Pakistan's reaction going to be to that? And especially if the Chinese support the Russians, which is more than likely. So we are in a really, at the moment, I would say, in a very confused situation where because of the elections in the US and because of what Putin has done in Syria, I think the whole region is in considerable diplomatic turmoil.
Let me just add, to address your question more directly. Currently, the United States pays $4 billion a year to maintain the Afghan National Security Forces. The contribution of the Afghan government itself is less than $500 million. If tomorrow the American money were to be withdrawn, and so far they've committed to up to 2020, the new commander or the commander who says he's talked to his seniors talks about requiring another 4 years and perhaps an augmented force. But if this force does not exist, try and visualize a situation where 500 million are to be used to pay what used to be a bill of $4 billion. What is going to happen? You're going to have people on the streets in Kabul and in all major cities in Afghanistan whose only skill lies in wielding a gun. They have been in the Afghan National Security Forces. What sort of a chaotic situation does this create? Therefore, by my reckoning, it is important for the United States to maintain a presence there, to be able to continue to support the Afghan National Security Forces and to run them down. Until those are run down, the Afghans, and by my reckoning, can afford to have an army of between 20 to 30,000, which is exactly in conformity with both their requirements and their financial capabilities. If it remains at this particular level, and this particular level is talked about only because of the Taliban insurgency, then you have a situation where the financial needs cannot be met. Second, it is only after you have a degree of stability that Afghanistan can start generating larger revenues. Today, much of its revenue is generated by imports, by the duties that it imposes on imports. Its total exports are $450 to $500 million. $450 to $500 million does not pay even a fraction of the total imports of Afghanistan. So we must realize what their financial position is and realize why the continued assistance, which has been promised up to 2020 under the Tokyo Agreement and under other agreements. I think the Brussels was the last agreement in terms of support. So these are things that we have to take into account, and we have to realize that currently Afghanistan is not able to sustain itself. It will need international assistance for some time to come. Karzai had talked about 2024. Now I think President Ghani will talk about a longer period than that.
Yeah, next one. Could we have someone at the back? Yeah, the one at the back there.
My name is Humaira. I think it's my turn now. Question is to Mr. Najmuddin Sheikh. The border, you said, should be treated as sacrosanct between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Why is it, in your opinion, why has the Afghan government not officially recognized the Durand Line as the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan? Thank you.
Well, look, this is a piece of history. Today, when you look at all the papers, you know that this agreement was arrived at and was voluntarily accepted. But this is not part of Afghan law. Afghan law consists of the fact that, of course, okay, even if there was an agreement, that agreement finished in 1890, it was signed in 1898, it finished in 1998, or that it was never valid in the first place, and so on and so forth. Now, one must accept that there are certain things that countries live with. The question is, how does this affect their conduct on the ground? And so far, I think the Afghans can perhaps maintain largely correctly that they have been observant of the Durand Line as it exists. I think this is something that we have to live with. Many countries live with these beliefs which is part of their history and which they cannot give up. I don't think that any government in Afghanistan today or in the near future, perhaps in the longer term future they will, but in the near future they will not give it up. The Taliban, whom we supported, said there is no such thing as borders between the Ummah, which was one way of putting us off the question. But nobody in Afghanistan today would really sign on the dotted line ratifying the Durand line. But that is not something that should affect us unless it affects the situation on the ground. And so far it is not affecting the situation on the ground.
I think another question we should be asking is why hasn't FATA been, the status of FATA been resolved by Pakistan? And the Afghans will say, well, why the hell should we recognize the Durand line when you've got this FATA which you say is neither part of Pakistan nor is part of Afghanistan, then what is it? And I've been very dismayed by the fact that the recent talks on FATA have once again been delayed. And, you know, we are not integrating FATA into KP province, which is what should be done.
My question is
Next question.
My question is to Mr. Ahmad Rashid. Hello.
Yeah.
The question is that you said that the civilian government does not have a role in the foreign policy. In my opinion, the civilian government is neither interested nor capable of playing that role. And if army also abandons that role, don't you think that there would be a major vacuum in the foreign policy of Pakistan? Thank you.
No. What I said was that the civilian government has not played a role in an Afghan policy. I didn't talk about all of Pakistan's foreign policy. And I think, yes, I think the government has made very serious mistakes with the Foreign Office by not using it sufficiently, by not appointing a foreign minister, by having this confusion at the helm of the foreign ministry, and you know, I don't think the Prime Minister has been taking the Foreign Office very seriously. And if he doesn't do that, then obviously there's going to be deterioration in morale, in what they can do and what they can't do. So I agree with you. I think the civilian government is a lot to blame. But on Afghanistan, I have no doubt in my mind that the military calls the shots. They make the policy. And the Foreign Office and the government refer to the military when it comes to Afghan policy.
My name is Azmat Baloch, and I think I'm quite comfortable if I ask my question in Urdu. जैसे अफ़गान पाकिस्तान फ़ॉरेन पॉलिसी की बात याद आती है, मुझे खटक साहब की एक बात याद आ गई कि इस पॉलिसी को, फ़ॉरेन पॉलिसी को ख़ासकर सरताज अज़ीज़ तो क्या अफलातून भी नहीं समझ सकते। खैर, पाकिस्तान में सबसे जो बड़े पश्तून नेशनलिस्ट पार्टी हैं उनमें ANP और पख्तूनख्वा मिली अवामी पार्टी, असफंदियार वली और महमूद खान चकजी साहब जो लीड कर रहे हैं, वो हमेशा पाकिस्तान में पश्तून कौमी इकाई, पश्तून जोग्राफियाई वहदत की बुनियाद पर, जैसे कि 2008 का और 2013 का इलेक्शन था, उनके मंशूर में भी ये है, और वो इस बुनियाद पर 2007 और 2008 में काबुल में पश्तून ग्रैंड कौमी जरगे इत्तेहाद का उसका हिस्सा भी हैं, अभी तक भी हैं। लेकिन वो ड्यूरेंट लाइन के इस तरफ पता नहीं शऊरी तौर पर पश्तूनों को पश्तून नहीं समझते या उनको उस इत्तेहाद का हिस्सा नहीं बनाना। अच्छा जी, मेरा सवाल ये है कि इस सिचुएशन में जबकि पश्तून सबसे बड़े नेशनलिस्ट पार्टी जो पाकिस्तान के पॉलिटिक्स, मेन स्ट्रीम लाइन पॉलिटिक्स के हिस्से हैं, वो ड्यूरेंट लाइन को अभी तक तस्लीम नहीं करते, तो आप दोनों के व्यू में, आपके ख्याल से इस ड्यूरेंट लाइन की मुस्तकबिल क्या होगी इन नियर फ्यूचर?
मुख्तसरन जवाब, अक्सरियत पख्तूनों की पाकिस्तान में है, अफगानिस्तान में नहीं। आप फिर मुझे वो फ़र्क बता दें, क्योंकि मेरी नज़र में अगर ड्यूरेंट लाइन की को तस्लीम नहीं करते हमारी तरफ वाले, मुझे समझ में नहीं आया कि वो क्या फिर क्या कहते हैं कि वो पख्तूनिस्तान का हिस्सा है, वो अफगानिस्तान का हिस्सा है? नहीं रिकग्नाइज करते से मुराद क्या कि जो पख्तून जो इन दो जमातों के हिस्से हैं, वो कहते हैं कि वो ये तो मैंने नहीं सुना, अब अगर कहा है तो ज़रा अजीब सी बात है।
Taliban are still given the sanctuary and patronage in Pakistan. Number two, after APS attack, General Rahil Sharif announced no good Taliban, no bad Taliban policy. Do you think that this is honest, being followed honestly?
देखिए, that is what you are hearing being advocated from this podium. That there has to be no distinction. That if we are going to seek to bring stability to Afghanistan as a precondition for bringing stability to Pakistan and for winning Pakistan's own battle against extremism and terrorism, then the question doesn't arise of distinguishing between good and bad. I told you that by my reckoning, the Afghan Taliban are the ones who command the loyalties of the TTP. The Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, as I said earlier, their leaders have sworn their loyalty to Mullah Umar, and I assume that now they swear their loyalty to Habibatullah Akhund. Now, if that is so, then we have to think as to how you draw a distinction between the two. You have seen reports that the TTP has sought shelter in Afghanistan and has sought shelter in areas that the Afghan Taliban control, or have sought shelter in areas where they have converted themselves into the ISIS or ISIS Khorasan, province of Khorasan. So, we have a very peculiar distribution here in which the TTP's adherents, former adherents, are now combining with the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan to form a new ISIS area, a sanctuary in Nangarhar province, for instance, or in Arghandab, and you have the other Afghan Taliban providing sanctuary to the Tehreek-e-Taliban in other areas that they control. So that distinction between good and bad Taliban, we have to do away with. That is the whole point of what we were trying to say from here.
My name is Mayur Botejo. I'm from Sri Lanka. My question is, do the strategic defense thinkers in Pakistan prefer a volatile Afghanistan to keep India from getting a firm foothold?
Sorry, what was the question?
That do people in Pakistan prefer a volatile Afghanistan to keep India from...
No, I don't think that's the case. Afghanistan is volatile for its own internal reasons, and the civil war that has gone on there. But yes, that volatility has been fueled because essentially we've taken sides. We've supported the Taliban against other elements in Afghanistan, the non-Pashtuns, etc., etc. And now other countries are also involved. I don't think we wish for a continuation of volatility in Afghanistan, especially, as I said, if we've got all these economic plans for this region and this one-off money that's coming in with the Chinese, etc. I think the whole issue of India has been hugely exaggerated by the Pakistani establishment. India, I think, has very limited access to sowing unrest in Afghanistan. Yes, it's got a $2 billion aid program for Afghanistan, which is huge. It's the third largest aid program in the world after, the Americans and the Europeans. But to blame every bomb blast in Peshawar and Quetta, to blame, every bomb blast anywhere on India, is becoming, I think, a losing battle for the Pakistani establishment, because nobody believes it. And certainly, internationally, nobody believes it. Which is why you are becoming more and more isolated internationally. Because, there's only so much that, a falsehood can carry through. Eventually, it's going to become stale. And, I think blaming India for the Quetta bombing, the Peshawar bombings and all this is really now hackneyed. We need to end this. And, we did end this for a period of time under both General Kiani and General Raheel. For a time, we kept saying that these are internal factors, not external factors. Unfortunately, now we've gone back to saying these are all external factors because of India. And we're accusing Afghanistan of planting bombs. I mean, it's quite possible they have, but I wouldn't say the Afghans are in a position right now, given that they are under siege from the Taliban, to launch a whole bombing campaign in Pakistan.
I'd just like to add one thing more to the economic picture. I said that we have, by my reckoning, 5 million Afghans on Pakistani soil. They are not being given a penny from the Pakistani exchequer, but they are drawing from the Pakistani economy at least $1 a day to survive. They are drawing this by working, but they are taking jobs for which there are sufficient unemployed Pakistanis to take their positions. So what do? We are in effect providing $2 billion worth of assistance to Afghanistan merely through employment. I'm not suggesting that this is free money that we are giving, but nobody ever computes the fact that this is a cost that is being extracted from the Pakistani economy, which could very easily have been met by Pakistani workers. So these are things that we should take into consideration also when we talk about the costs of the Afghan situation to Pakistan.
I think we have to end now.
Yeah.
4:30.
Yeah.
I think we have to end now. It's 4:30.
I have a question.
One more question,
Ahmed Saab, you just mentioned in your presentation that the fragmentation process started in Taliban, especially after the death of Mullah Umar. What do you think? Would it have a positive impact in existing circumstances, or it will have a negative impact on the situation?
Well, I think there are many aspects of this. The first is that with fragmentation, I think there's an opportunity here for the peace lobby, and I do believe there is a peace lobby in the Taliban, to come forward and become stronger and be more open about what they want in talks with Kabul. But on the other hand, the fact that there's so much fragmentation means that there are plenty of people who can sabotage any kind of peace process, and you won't know exactly who they are. And and if you make an agreement, if the Taliban come to the table with one or two factions, and other factions are left out, they too will be able to sabotage the process. So there are plus and minuses on both sides, and obviously the situation has become much more complicated than if you had resolved this problem 2 or 3 years ago. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Hello. The next session in this hall are the UBL Literary Excellence Awards. Thank you.